The First World War was not only a conflict of weapons, trenches, and empires. It was a war of decisions. Decisions made in distant headquarters, drawn on maps with straight lines and colored pencils, far from the mud, blood, and fear of the front lines. Some of those decisions shaped history. Others sealed the fate of millions. This video reveals the most catastrophic military decisions of World War I. Plans conceived with confidence, executed with discipline, and destroyed by reality. What you are about to hear is not speculation, but history written in orders, diaries, and after-action reports, told through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy these war journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought in the comments below. This helps others find their way here too. For now, let's begin our journey. When Europe marched to war in 1914, generals believed they were fighting the last war of the 19th century. They trusted speed, courage, and rigid doctrine more than adaptability, and that belief would cost lives on an industrial scale. One of the earliest and most disastrous decisions was the unwavering faith in rapid offensive strategies. At the outbreak of war, most European powers believed that attacking quickly and decisively would bring victory before the enemy could fully mobilize. France, haunted by its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, adopted Plan 17, a strategy rooted in the doctrine of élan vital, the belief that the fighting spirit and aggressive will of soldiers could overcome any obstacle. French troops were ordered to advance into Alsace-Lorraine wearing bright red trousers and blue coats, marching into battle with flags raised and bayonets fixed. Machine guns, modern artillery, and entrenched German positions cut them down in staggering numbers. Officers continued to order frontal assaults, even as entire regiments were wiped out within minutes. Reports from the front described fields littered with bodies, yet the commands remained unchanged. The decision to prioritize morale over modern firepower resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties in the opening months alone. Germany, too, placed its faith in a rigid plan, the Schlieffen Plan. Designed years before the war, it called for a massive right-wing sweep through Belgium to encircle Paris and defeat France in 6 weeks before turning east to face Russia. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it depended on perfect timing, flawless logistics, and absolute obedience to the plan's original design. But war does not obey plans. When German forces invaded Belgium, unexpected resistance slowed their advance. Rail lines were sabotaged, supply columns stretched thin, and troops exhausted themselves marching longer distances than anticipated. Critical decisions made by commanders in the field altered the plan's execution. Units were diverted, flanks weakened, and coordination broke down. At the First Battle of the Marne, French and British forces exploited these gaps, halting the German advance just miles from Paris. The decision not to adapt, to cling to a pre-war plan despite changing conditions, transformed what Germany hoped would be a swift victory into a prolonged, grinding war of attrition. As the front lines froze into trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland, another fatal decision emerged: the belief that frontal assaults could break trench warfare. British commanders, many of whom had never experienced modern industrial warfare, believed that courage and discipline could overcome barbed wire and machine guns. This belief reached its deadliest expression on July 1, 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme. For a week, British artillery bombarded German trenches, firing over 1.5 million shells. Commanders were convinced that nothing could survive such a barrage. Soldiers were told they would simply walk forward and occupy destroyed enemy positions. They were wrong. The bombardment failed to destroy German bunkers or cut barbed wire. When British troops went over the top, advancing at a walking pace, they were met with devastating machine gun fire. By nightfall, nearly 60,000 British soldiers were casualties, over 19,000 dead, the bloodiest day in British military history. Yet the decision-makers did not stop. The offensive continued for months, gaining only a few miles of devastated ground at the cost of over 1 million casualties on both sides. The refusal to abandon failed tactics turned the Somme into a symbol of strategic blindness. Another catastrophic decision was the underestimation of defensive warfare and the overconfidence in artillery alone. Generals believed that prolonged bombardments would crush enemy morale and defenses, but soldiers adapted. They dug deeper bunkers, reinforced positions, and waited out the shelling. When the guns stopped, defenders emerged ready to fight. This pattern repeated itself again and again, at Verdun, Passchendaele, and countless lesser-known battles. Each time, commanders expected a breakthrough. Each time, the result was slaughter. At Verdun, the German High Command made a chilling calculation. Rather than seeking a decisive victory, they aimed to bleed France white by attacking a symbolically important position the French would defend at all costs. The plan succeeded, but not as intended. For 10 months, Verdun became a meat grinder. Both sides poured men and material into the battle. Artillery fire was constant, the landscape reduced to ash and mud. Entire villages disappeared from the map. In the end, France held Verdun, but both sides suffered around 700,000 casualties. Germany had bled itself nearly as badly as its enemy. The decision to wage a battle of attrition without a clear path to victory weakened both armies and prolonged the war.
Perhaps one of the most overlooked failures was the dismissal of new technology. Early in the war, tanks were proposed as a way to break trench stalemates. Many senior officers dismissed them as unreliable or unnecessary. When tanks were finally deployed, they were often used in small numbers, without proper coordination with infantry or artillery. At the Somme in 1916, British tanks appeared for the first time. They terrified German soldiers, but mechanical failures and poor planning limited their impact. Instead of refining their use, commanders hesitated, missing opportunities to exploit a revolutionary weapon. Similarly, air power was initially undervalued. Aircraft were used primarily for reconnaissance, despite early evidence that controlling the skies could dramatically influence battles. Only later in the war did air superiority become a central strategic objective, after countless missed opportunities. Behind every failed decision were human beings, generals shaped by outdated training, political pressures, and fear of appearing weak. Many refused to acknowledge mistakes, believing that admitting failure would destroy morale or their careers. Soldiers paid the price. Letters from the front tell a different story than official reports. Men wrote of orders that made no sense, of repeated attacks against the same fortified positions, of watching friends die for ground that would be abandoned days later. They understood, long before their commanders, that the war had changed, but their voices rarely reached the top. As 1916 drew to a close, the war showed no signs of ending. Millions were dead, empires trembled, and yet many leaders still believed that one more offensive, one more push would bring victory. The greatest tragedy of World War I was not just the violence, it was the persistence of failure. Decisions proven wrong were repeated, not because they worked, but because no one knew what to replace them with. By the second year of the war, it had become clear to the men in the trenches that World War I would not be short. Yet far behind the front lines, in grand headquarters and government offices, many leaders continued to believe that victory was just one decisive decision away. What followed was not adaptation, but escalation, a series of military choices driven by pride, political pressure, and fear of admitting failure. These decisions did not shorten the war, they deepened it, turning entire regions into graveyards. One of the most damaging patterns of the war was the refusal of high command to accept bad news. Reports from the front were often filtered, softened, or ignored. Generals preferred optimistic summaries over brutal truth. In many armies, officers who questioned strategy were sidelined, while those who promised breakthroughs were rewarded. This culture of denial ensured that failed decisions were not corrected but repeated. Nowhere was this more evident than on the Western Front, where offensives followed a grim formula: prolonged artillery bombardment, mass infantry assault, catastrophic casualties, minimal territorial gain. Each time, commanders blamed poor execution rather than flawed strategy. The belief that success was inevitable if only the soldiers tried harder became a deadly illusion. In Britain, political pressure played a decisive role. Civilian leaders demanded visible action to justify the enormous sacrifices being made. Doing nothing was politically unacceptable, even if waiting and regrouping might have saved lives. As a result, generals felt compelled to launch offensives, regardless of readiness or conditions. This pressure culminated in repeated assaults throughout 1917, even as evidence mounted that such attacks were futile. Mud, shell craters, and relentless rain transformed battlefields into nightmares. At Passchendaele, also known as the Third Battle of Ypres, British forces were ordered to advance across terrain so destroyed that men and horses drowned in mud. Tanks sank, artillery pieces vanished into the ground. Still, the attacks continued. The decision to press on at Passchendaele was defended as necessary to maintain pressure on Germany and support allies elsewhere. In reality, it became a symbol of command detached from reality. After months of fighting and hundreds of thousands of casualties, the Allies gained just a few miles of shattered ground that held no strategic value. German command suffered from similar flaws. As the war dragged on, Germany increasingly relied on defensive doctrine, constructing deep trench systems designed to absorb enemy attacks. While effective tactically, this strategy encouraged passivity and a belief that the enemy would eventually collapse first. It also created a dangerous dependence on attrition, a gamble that Germany's resources and population could not sustain indefinitely. At the same time, Germany made one of the most consequential decisions of the war: the escalation of unrestricted submarine warfare. German leaders believed that sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced would force Britain to surrender. Naval officers warned that this policy risked drawing neutral nations into the conflict, particularly the United States. Those warnings were dismissed. The decision was not purely military, it was political and psychological. Germany felt cornered, strangled by blockade, and desperate for a decisive move. When submarines began sinking merchant ships without warning, civilian casualties mounted. International outrage followed. In 1917, the United States entered the war. This single decision transformed the conflict. What Germany hoped would be a knockout blow became a strategic catastrophe. Fresh American manpower and industrial power tipped the balance against the Central Powers. It was a reminder that military decisions do not exist in isolation. They reshape the entire geopolitical landscape. On the Eastern Front, failures of decision took a different form. The Russian Empire entered the war with vast manpower, but poor infrastructure, outdated equipment, and fragile political stability. Russian commanders repeatedly launched offensives without adequate supplies or coordination. Soldiers were sent into battle without rifles, ordered to pick up weapons from fallen comrades. These decisions shattered morale. Defeats piled up. Trust in leadership collapsed. By 1917, the Russian army was not just losing battles, it was dissolving. Desertions became common. Entire units refused orders. The military failures of the war directly fueled revolution at home, leading to the collapse of the Russian monarchy and Russia's eventual withdrawal from the conflict. The decision to continue fighting without addressing systemic weaknesses destroyed an empire from within. Another critical failure was the mishandling of coalition warfare. World War I was not fought by single nations alone, but by alliances, and those alliances were often strained by conflicting priorities. Allied commanders frequently disagreed on where and how to fight. Political leaders demanded action in one theater, while military leaders argued for another. This tension was evident in peripheral campaigns such as Gallipoli. Conceived as a bold strategy to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war and open a supply route to Russia, the campaign suffered from poor planning, inadequate intelligence, and underestimation of the enemy. Troops landed on hostile shores with limited maps, unclear objectives, and insufficient support. Ottoman defenders, led by capable commanders, held high ground and inflicted devastating losses. Despite clear signs that the campaign was failing, leadership hesitated to withdraw, fearing political embarrassment. Months passed, casualties mounted. Eventually, the Allies evacuated, quietly and successfully, proving that withdrawal had always been possible. The decision to launch Gallipoli without proper preparation and the delay in ending it cost hundreds of thousands of lives for no strategic gain. Across all fronts, one theme repeated itself. The fear of appearing weak outweighed the fear of losing soldiers. Commanders believed that stopping an offensive signaled defeat. Politicians feared public backlash. As a result, battles continued long after their objectives were unattainable. Yet even as mistakes accumulated, lessons were slowly learned. New tactics began to emerge: infiltration units, combined arms warfare, improved coordination between infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft. These innovations showed promise, but they often arrived too late, delayed by conservative leadership and institutional resistance. By the end of 1917, exhaustion gripped every nation involved. Populations were weary, armies were stretched to their limits, and yet decisions were made that gambled everything on one final effort.
By 1918, World War I had reached a breaking point. 4 years of industrialized slaughter had drained nations of manpower, resources, and hope. Commanders on all sides knew the war could not continue much longer. But instead of caution, this realization fueled desperation. The final major decisions of the war were no longer shaped by confidence or doctrine, but by fear of collapse. These were gambles taken in the belief that losing everything was preferable to losing slowly. Germany faced the most urgent crisis. With Russia out of the war after the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, German leaders saw a brief window of opportunity. For the first time in years, they could transfer troops from the Eastern Front to the West. American forces were arriving in increasing numbers, but many had not yet seen combat. German command believed that if they struck hard and fast, they could break the Allies before the full weight of American power arrived. Thus was born the Spring Offensive of 1918, also known as the Kaiserschlacht, the Emperor's Battle. Unlike earlier offensives, this one showed signs of learning. Germany employed new infiltration tactics, using specially trained stormtroopers to bypass strong points and disrupt enemy command structures. Artillery was used more precisely. For a moment, it seemed the war might finally move again. And yet, the core decision behind the offensive was fatally flawed. Germany had no clear strategic objective beyond breaking the enemy. There was no single decisive target, no city, supply hub, or army whose capture would force Allied surrender. Instead, German forces advanced in multiple directions, stretching supply lines and exhausting elite units. Success created new problems faster than command could solve them. As German troops pushed forward, they encountered abandoned Allied supply dumps. Hungry and exhausted after years of blockade, many soldiers stopped to eat, loot, and rest. Discipline eroded, momentum slowed. Command struggled to coordinate advances across a rapidly changing battlefield. Most critically, Germany lacked the logistical capacity to sustain deep advances. Horses collapsed, ammunition ran low. Reinforcements could not keep pace. What began as a tactical success turned into strategic overreach. By summer, the offensive had stalled. Germany had suffered massive casualties, many among its best, most experienced troops. The decision to gamble everything on one final offensive left the German army weakened and exposed.
On the Allied side, failure took a different form: the delayed unification of command. For years, British and French armies had operated largely independently, coordinating only when necessary. National pride and political concerns prevented the appointment of a single supreme commander. This changed only after the shock of the Spring Offensive of 1918. Faced with collapse, the Allies finally placed General Ferdinand Foch in overall command. The decision came late, but it worked. Unified command allowed for better coordination, flexible defense, and rapid reinforcement of threatened sectors. The irony was brutal. A decision that could have saved countless lives earlier was made only when disaster loomed. Another failure of judgment lay in the continued underestimation of morale, not just of soldiers, but of entire societies. German leadership believed its population could endure indefinitely under blockade. British leaders assumed their empire could supply endless manpower. French command expected its soldiers to attack again and again without breaking. Each assumption was wrong. By 1918, mutinies, strikes, and unrest spread across Europe. French troops had already mutinied in 1917 after disastrous offensives. Russian soldiers had abandoned the war entirely. German sailors would soon revolt, sparking revolution at home. These were not sudden events. They were the result of years of decisions that treated human endurance as infinite. One of the clearest examples of moral collapse tied to decision-making was the handling of exhausted units. Rather than rotating troops effectively, armies often kept divisions in the line until they were physically and psychologically broken. Commanders feared that pulling units back signaled weakness or reduced pressure on the enemy. The result was burnout on a massive scale. Soldiers described feeling like ghosts, numb, detached, waiting for death. Combat effectiveness declined, not because men lacked courage, but because they were beyond human limits. Meanwhile, technological lessons continued to be applied unevenly. Tanks, aircraft, and coordinated artillery finally began to show their true potential in Allied offensives later in 1918. But these successes only highlighted how long such methods had been resisted. Earlier adoption could have shortened the war significantly. The final Allied advance, known as the 100 Days Offensive, succeeded not because of overwhelming bravery alone, but because many earlier mistakes were finally corrected. Command was unified, objectives were limited and realistic, combined arms tactics were used effectively, enemy weaknesses were exploited rather than ignored. Still, even in victory, failure lingered. The decision to push relentlessly towards German borders accelerated Germany's internal collapse, but it also ensured that surrender came suddenly, without Allied armies fully occupying the country. This allowed myths to flourish, myths that Germany had not truly been defeated on the battlefield, but betrayed from within. These myths would have devastating consequences in the decades to come. World War I ended not with clarity, but with exhaustion. Millions were dead, empires lay in ruins, and yet many of the men who had made the war so deadly would never fully accept responsibility for their decisions. Memoirs were written, blame was shifted, failures were rebranded as inevitabilities, but the evidence remained in casualty lists, in ruined landscapes, in the testimonies of survivors.
When the guns finally fell silent on November 11, 1918, the world believed the nightmare was over. Church bells rang, crowds filled the streets, and exhausted soldiers laid down their weapons. But the true consequences of the failed military decisions of World War I were only beginning to unfold. The war had ended, yet the damage caused by years of strategic blindness, stubborn command, and political interference would shape the entire 20th century. The first and perhaps most profound failure came in how the war was concluded. Germany's surrender was sudden. Its armies were retreating, but they had not been decisively destroyed on their own soil. Allied troops had not marched on Berlin.
This outcome was a direct result of earlier decisions, the inability to coordinate a faster victory, the choice to prolong attritional warfare, and the final gamble of 1918 that collapsed Germany internally rather than militarily. This created a dangerous ambiguity. Many German soldiers returned home believing they had not truly been defeated. They had followed orders, fought hard, and held their ground for years. Now they were told the war was lost. This gap between battlefield reality and political outcome gave rise to the stab-in-the-back myth, the idea that Germany had been betrayed by politicians, civilians, and internal enemies, rather than defeated by Allied armies. That myth would poison German society for a generation. The peace itself reflected another catastrophic decision, the belief that punishment would ensure stability. At the Treaty of Versailles, military failure was transformed into political humiliation. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war, surrender territory, disarm its military, and pay enormous reparations. Rather than creating lasting peace, these decisions fostered resentment, economic collapse, and political extremism. The generals who had made disastrous choices during the war largely escaped accountability. Instead, blame shifted downward, onto civilians, minorities, and democratic institutions. The uneasy failure to align military reality with political settlement ensured that the war's ending felt unjust, incomplete, and temporary. Across Europe, similar patterns emerged. Empires that had entered the war with confidence no longer existed. Austria-Hungary shattered into unstable successor states. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, leaving behind borders drawn with little regard for ethnic or religious realities. These borders, shaped by wartime decisions and post-war neglect, became fault lines for future conflicts that still burn today. France, despite being on the victorious side, paid a terrible price for its early strategic failures. Entire regions were destroyed. A generation of young men was lost. The trauma of Verdun, the Somme, and endless offensives left deep scars on national memory. French military doctrine after the war became obsessed with defense, leading to rigid strategies that would fail disastrously in 1940. Britain emerged victorious but exhausted. Its empire was overstretched. Public trust in leadership had been shaken by years of futile offensives and censored truths. The belief that sacrifice alone could substitute for sound strategy had been exposed as a lie written in blood. And for the soldiers, the men who carried out these failed decisions, the war never truly ended. Millions returned home wounded in body or mind. Shell shock, what we now call post-traumatic stress, haunted veterans long after peace was declared. Many struggled to reintegrate into societies that could not understand what they had endured. Their suffering was the direct consequence of choices made far from the front, choices that treated human lives as expendable resources. The most haunting legacy of World War I's failed military decisions is this: the war solved almost none of the problems that caused it. Nationalism intensified. Arms races resumed. Old grudges hardened into ideology. The belief that war could be controlled, planned, and mastered by clever strategy survived, despite all evidence to the contrary. Within just 20 years, the world would be at war again. The Second World War was not an accident. It was the continuation of unresolved failures, the refusal to learn fully from the catastrophe of 1914 to 1918. Many of the same assumptions returned: faith in rapid victory, underestimation of the enemy, overconfidence in doctrine, and the silencing of dissenting voices within military command. World War I should have been a warning. Instead, it became a rehearsal. Today, historians no longer see the Great War as a tragic inevitability, but as a series of human decisions, decisions that could have been different. Every failed offensive, every ignored report, every stubborn refusal to adapt added another layer to the disaster. Understanding these failures is not about assigning blame to the past. It is about recognizing patterns that still exist, the danger of rigid thinking, the cost of pride in leadership, and the human price of strategic arrogance. The trenches may be gone, the uniforms may have changed, but the lessons remain. And history, when ignored, has a way of repeating itself. If you watched this documentary until the end, leave a comment with the keyword plans so we know you stayed with us through the entire journey. Tell us what you think. Which military decision shocked you the most? Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to support our work. Keep watching. More war documentaries and historical deep dives are appearing on your screen right now. History doesn't end, and neither does the story.